Up until that point, no one had been asking about the money. The discussions had followed a familiar pattern: authorization codes, wire transfers, offshore accounts, and tightly controlled instructions, all backed by digital records showing how funds move through monitored systems. Receipts, logs, approval chains, everything could be tracked, verified, subpoenaed, and placed into official records. But cash works differently, and that was the gap no one had focused on. Cash doesn't rely on routing numbers, permission codes, or receipts tied to specific offices on specific dates. It exists outside that system, and that's exactly why it's used when someone doesn't want a trail. Adam Schiff, however, had uncovered something that didn't fit the usual pattern. It wasn't buried in complex transfer logs or digital authorizations. It was simpler, more old-fashioned. It came from a deposition that had been sitting in a Palm Beach County civil court file for 11 years. No one had connected it to the Department of Justice settlement timeline until Schiff's team took a closer look 6 weeks earlier. What they found pointed to a $50,000 cash withdrawal made on a specific date, delivered to a particular location, and linked through timing, place, and sworn testimony in a Florida civil case to a payment connected to Jeffrey Epstein. This all happened before any federal settlement had been finalized, before any DOJ authorization codes existed, and even before Pam Bondi had stepped into her role. The money came first. That detail would become critical, especially toward the end of the hearing, when Schiff's response to questions about the cash and Bondi's eventual comments reshaped how everything before it was understood. Adding to the mystery, the location tied to the transaction had no network coverage, making the absence of digital traces even more significant. To fully grasp why this matters, it's important to understand that wire transfers reflect actions taken within official systems, while this cash pointed to something that may have happened before those systems were even involved. On Monday at 11:17 a.m. Eastern Time, the Senate Intelligence Committee convened in room H216 at the Hart Senate Office Building. Bondi arrived a few minutes early at 11:09, accompanied by 2 attorneys and a senior aide, though as some observers note, having more legal support at the table doesn't necessarily make the questions easier. She appeared more worn than before, not dramatically, but in the way that comes from months of preparation and repeated scrutiny. Schiff was already seated with a folder and a yellow legal pad in front of him, a familiar setup for someone experienced in handling high-stakes hearings and carefully timed revelations. For the first 45 minutes, everything stayed within standard procedure. Oversight of intelligence operations, counterintelligence priorities, and discussions around foreign influence. Bondi's responses were measured and thoughtful, but nothing during that stretch pointed to anything that would leave a lasting mark on the official record. She checked her watch as the 40-minute mark passed, and that's when Schiff leaned forward and reached for the microphone. "Madam Attorney General," he began, his voice steady and precise, the kind of tone that suggested he had been waiting for this exact moment. "I'd like to go back for a moment before your confirmation, before your time at the Department of Justice, and before the transactions this committee has been reviewing." Bondi's expression remained unchanged. Schiff continued, shifting the focus carefully. "In 2008, when you were serving as Florida's Assistant State Attorney, your office made a decision regarding Jeffrey Epstein that I'd like to revisit." There was a subtle shift in the room. The connection to 2008 had surfaced before during the Blumenthal hearing, so many already had a sense of where this might lead. "At that time, your office chose not to prosecute Epstein in connection with the Palm Beach investigation. That decision, and the federal non-prosecution agreement that followed, has been closely examined. You've addressed questions about it before." He paused, then tapped the folder in front of him. "But you have not answered this under oath, in this setting or any other." He placed the first document on the table. In 2013, a civil subpoena was filed in Palm Beach County Circuit Court to obtain bank withdrawal records. This document shows a $50,000 cash withdrawal from an account linked to Coastal Advisory Partners, a Florida-based LLC, dated March 3, 2008. He looked directly at Bondi. "That's 4 months before your office formally declined to pursue charges against Jeffrey Epstein." Then he set a second document beside the first. "This page comes from a deposition in that same civil case," he said, his tone unchanged. The witness was asked about that March 3 withdrawal, specifically why the money was taken out. The witness stated that the $50,000 had been sent to a third party with the purpose of reaching an understanding regarding the Epstein matter in Palm Beach. Schiff made it clear he was referring to that exact piece of evidence as he looked up and repeated the phrase, reaching an agreement, before placing the deposition document flat on the table. He then restated the timeline with precision. On March 3, 2008, $50,000 in cash was handed off to a third party in connection with settling issues tied to the Epstein case, for months before Bondi's office chose not to pursue charges. His gaze stayed fixed on her. Madam Attorney General, do you know what happened to that money? Who received it? Do you know if any portion of it ended up within an official setting? The room fell completely silent. Not the quiet of people absorbing routine information, but a tense, suspended stillness that comes when something lands far outside what anyone expected. No one moved, not the witness, not the attorneys, not even the committee members who hadn't anticipated this line of questioning. Bondi's lead attorney reacted first, stepping in quickly before the moment stretched any further. Mr. Chairman, I need to request a pause, he said firmly. It is unreasonable to expect my client to respond to claims like this without prior notice or time to review the materials. The chairman responded just as directly, noting that Senator Schiff had submitted the documents properly and that they were now part of the official record, meaning the witness would need to respond. The attorney glanced toward Bondi, and she briefly looked down at the two documents lying side by side on the table before lifting her eyes back to Schiff, her jaw tightening as the weight of the moment settled in. A subtle twitch kept pulsing beneath her left ear, a small sign she was working hard to stay composed. Senator, she began, her voice steady, each word chosen with care. To be clear, I'm not aware of any financial transactions involving Jeffrey Epstein. The decisions made by my office in 2008 were based solely on legal standards and the evidence available at the time. I strongly reject any suggestion that those decisions were influenced by money. Schiff gave a slow nod before continuing. So you're not aware of a $50,000 cash withdrawal? She responded just as firmly, saying she had no knowledge of such a transaction. And Coastal Advisory Partners LLC? There was a brief pause, so quick it was almost unnoticeable. I don't recall that specifically, she replied. Schiff opened his folder again. Let me refresh your memory. He introduced a third document, explaining that the company had been formally registered in Broward County, Florida, on January 14, 2007. Then he pointed to a key detail. According to Florida bar records submitted to this committee last week, the registered agent is Thomas R. Whitfield, a lawyer who represented your office in two separate civil matters between 2006 and 2008 while you were assistant state attorney. He placed the paper down deliberately. So for months before your office declined to prosecute Jeffrey Epstein, an attorney connected to your office registered the LLC that withdrew $50,000 in cash. He looked directly at her. Does that help clarify anything? Bondi's lead attorney quickly stepped in again. Mr. Chairman, I object to this line of questioning. It relies on assumptions built from circumstantial connections. The chairman's response was immediate and firm. Counsel, please sit down. The attorney complied. Schiff didn't shift his focus. 58 seconds, Madam Attorney General. Do you know why Thomas Whitfield withdrew $50,000 in cash in March 2008 in connection with the Epstein matter? The silence that followed felt different from earlier ones. This wasn't hesitation over phrasing or legal caution. It felt like a moment where there were no easy options left. Her attorney leaned in and spoke quietly to her, and she gave a slight nod before responding. On advice of counsel, Senator, I cannot answer questions that could create legal complications for third parties until they've had an opportunity to respond through proper legal channels. Schiff held her gaze for a long moment. So when asked about a $50,000 cash payment tied to a prosecutorial decision made by your office, you're unable to answer? Yes, she said. That accurately reflects my position. He gathered the documents into a neat stack. A cash withdrawal record, a sworn deposition describing its purpose, a corporate filing linking it to legal counsel associated with your office, and your testimony that you have no knowledge of any of it. He submitted all three into the Senate record. These entries don't change. Every name, every figure, every date. He paused briefly. The decision not to prosecute came roughly 4 months after March 3, 2008. Then he looked at her one last time. In earlier sessions, we examined wire transfers, transactions that pass through systems designed to create records. When those systems came under scrutiny, efforts were made to limit visibility through sealed orders, privilege claims, and classification. He paused for a moment, then continued with quiet emphasis. Cash doesn't create a trail, but someone clearly understood that. What does leave a trail, however, are depositions, withdrawal records, and corporate filings, and now all three sat in the Senate record, tied together and carrying her name alongside them. Schiff began gathering his materials, his point already made. Instructions, settlements, authorization codes, those all come after the money moves. He gave the documents one last glance. This part of the story doesn't begin with track transfers. It traces back to 2008. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," he said, closing his folder. The hearing moved forward for another hour, with other senators stepping in and asking their questions. Bondi answered each one with control and precision, showing no visible hesitation. But the three documents remained in place: the withdrawal record, the sworn deposition, and the corporate filing, now permanently part of the official record. Schiff's final remarks were already etched into the transcript beside them. The money came first, before any settlements. 3 documents, 1 cash withdrawal, 58 seconds of silence, and a timeline that linked 2008 to everything that followed. A connection that had never before been laid out under oath in any hearing until that morning. And while the session eventually came to a close, the story itself didn't. The civil case tied to that deposition is still ongoing, and the attorney listed in the corporate filing has yet to be questioned by the committee, leaving open threads that could shift the conversation even further.